So the Sunday Times have conducted a series of special reports on Clare GAA over the past couple of weeks. And delighted to say that sports writer with the Sunday Times, Michael Foley, is on the line to tell us more. And Michael, I suppose yourself, Dennis Welch and Mark Tide in the Sunday Times have highlighted a number of issues in recent times, like highlighting issues surrounding the Clare Supporters Club, the training facility in Caherlohan, and also the difficulties that Clare manager Brian Lohan has faced during the 2020 Championship. Looking at the first of those, the Clare Supporters Club, I suppose you've raised questions around how that was run between 2012 and 2015. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, as you say, I suppose it's in that period of time. Davy Fitzgerald would have been the manager at the time, and obviously Clare would have won an All Ireland in 2013. So it was a good time for Clare hurling in particular. So I suppose the questions compared to Clare supporters clubs that have been in existence post 2016. It's important to say at the top of all this that the questions and the things that we're looking into now have been topics of conversation in Clare for a long, long time. Things like the supporters club, for example, there's been questions around transparency, questions around are there audited accounts available that we can see. Davy Fitzgerald himself addressed this in his own autobiography, insisting that there were audited accounts available from his time in charge from the supporters club that time, and if people had issues with it, they should just go and look at those. But as we've sort of, I suppose, teased out over the past few weeks, there has been no oversight from Clare GAA in regard to their supporters club. So in an ordinary situation, under GAA rule, your county board, your official county board, will have some oversight on an independent supporters club if such a thing exists in your county. So, the supporters club will have audited accounts, and the accounts will be presented at annual convention or incorporated into the official accounts of the county board for that year. In Clare's case, and this is coming from Clare County Board themselves, they have had no oversight. They have no connection, no responsibility in regard to their supporters clubs up to now, which in itself flies in the face of recommended practice and rule in the GAA. So you have a scenario where, yes, supporters clubs, I would say since 2017, have audited accounts, and they're there to be seen. Previous to that, there are question marks as to whether those accounts are available in existence. Can we see them? And this has been a source of tension in Clare for a long, long time.
And is this something that Croke Park will be looking into, Michael? Because Clare have admitted themselves that between that period, 2012 to 2015, that there was no oversight of the funds raised by the supporters group.
Well, that's the thing. I think that was, that's where we are now. You've more or less hit the nail on the head. I mean, looking back to that time, the GAA's National Audit and Risk Committee have now committed to going in and having a look at these Clare supporters clubs, see how the whole operation is run, just for clarity. And I think to me, that's the word at the centre of all this is clarity. There's been so much rumour and innuendo and debate within Clare itself. The lack of clarity around a lot of issues, including the supporters club, has added a certain toxicity to the conversations that doesn't need to be there. And it needs at this point, at the last monthly county board meeting, when by that point we had, there was questions around the running of the supporters club, there was questions around Caherlohan, as you mentioned there, and there was questions around how the county hurlers and Brian Lohan, their sort of working conditions, if you like, in 2020. All these issues were there in front of delegates at the last meeting, but only one person made any remark in relation to any of those, kind of saying that, we need to audit ourselves essentially and answer these questions ourselves before anybody else, before we need to ask anyone else to come in and answer them. But there was no reaction to that, either from the executive or from other delegates. So when you have a scenario like that, I personally think it does come back to Croke Park to go, okay, there's a need for, I suppose, a form of honest broker here to go in and just look at the case, just look at the situation, look at the detail, look at the data that's available to them, and come up with conclusions and recommendations that improve things. This is something that the GAA have done in Mayo in recent years. They've done it in Galway in particular. So it's not unusual, and certainly all the conditions in Clare would be there for their audit and risk committee to go in and have a look, at the very least the audit and risk committee, and that is the next step in relation to the supporters club, is that the GAA's audit and risk committee are going to go in and have a look.
And then turning to the Caherlohan training facility, Michael, like this was purchased for $2.5 million in 2005 and was open 10 years later. Can you describe the condition of it right now?
Yeah, well, it's extraordinary, as you say. Yeah, 2.3 million to buy it. The total cost at the moment, well, certainly up to 2019, according to the county treasurer, was 4.8 million. But the actual return on that money has fallen a long way short of what they would have expected. So they had planned for 7 pitches, they got 5. They planned for 4 floodlit pitches, they got 2 floodlit pitches. They have a gym that's only big enough to accommodate 20 people, barely. The kitchen is like a shell. There was a second-hand kitchen put into it in September last, but it looks unused. They have ice bats that are orange ice bats that just look filthy. There are cardboard boxes of stuff like blinds and flooring dating back to 2013 just stacked up in rooms that needs to be put down. The dining room now doubles as a meeting room. There's no medical room. There's no defibrillator installed by the end of last year. Anyway, there's no public toilets. The car park isn't finished, and there's a smell off the water that's so strong that some players down the years have preferred to shower at home. Stuff like a synthetic pitch that was included was never built. And other little, I suppose, smaller items like a hill sprint area and a hurling alley and things like that, they're also included in the plans, were never built. So, and even in terms of the actual practical use of the place, even in that state, Clare footballers have used the facility quite regularly, but the hurlers have found the pitches completely unsuitable for hurling. So you've got a €5 million centre of excellence that's not come up to scratch at all. And again, there are questions around, well, where was that money spent? Now there are overall sort of figures available for different phases of the project, so you can see where the money has gone to a degree. But I mean, when you look, we were able to secure photographs taken very, very recently of the place that appeared in the paper, and I mean, to look at it, doesn't look like a €5 million centre of excellence. If anything, it feels like a symbol of dysfunction, to be honest. That there's something clearly wrong here. If you can get that much money together, and we're talking about 1.9 million of GAA money, Central Council funds gone in, $500,000 from the Munster Council. But then beyond that, then it's donors and supporters funding this thing, and this is what they've got for their money.
And how did these difficulties behind the scenes, Michael, impact on Brian Lohan and the Clare hurling squad during the 2020 campaign?
Yeah, I think that's probably I suppose for a lot of people, that will be the issue that sort of jumps out the most, is how the hurlers had to deal with things last year in particular. There was a succession of issues from pretty much from the time that Brian Lohan took over in around October 2019. By December, he was chasing the board for money that was owed to the team's strength and conditioning coach. Lohan ended up paying that money out of his own pocket 4 days before Christmas. He was reimbursed in the middle of January. There was a match away. It was an away match against Wexford in the league. It was a key game. They stayed in a hotel in Waterford the night before, but the bill wasn't settled on their departure. So Brian Lohan himself had to chase the payment. There was a post-match meal that wasn't covered. Again, Lohan settled the bill on his credit card. He was reimbursed a few days later. Very curious things, like even Clare had a 10-year-old GPS tracking system, and I won't go into the general, the nitty-gritty detail, but essentially it cost $18,000 a year. Lohan and his management team managed to source a system from Stat Sports that would be similar to what's used by Liverpool and the German national football team. It was a much better deal overall, and it would have cost $15,000 a year for 3 years, and at the end of it they would have owned the gear. But the board were very, very slow to agree to what was essentially a cost-cutting measure, and you were receiving items that were of higher quality than you already had. As I mentioned there before, there was issues around Caherlohan. The pitch just wasn't good enough for training on, so they had to go on tour basically last winter. I think there was about 5 different clubs they wanted to use. At one stage, the week after, people remember maybe Clare Clare took a heavy defeat to Limerick in the Munster Championship, and they lost by 10 points. The following week, they wanted to go to Cusack Park in Ennis to train, but when they got there, it was locked. They had to break a lock in the gates with a sledgehammer to get in. So you just have all of, it's just a kind of a succession of highly frustrating. And I think at this stage, for an awful lot of people, reading and listening to this stuff, you kind of think, gosh, I thought most elite hurling counties had gone past this kind of stuff. But, these are still issues that counties, and probably not just Clare, have to deal with, managers have to deal with. And again, it probably just comes back to clarity and communication and relationships,
Well, sports writer with the Sunday Times, Michael Foley, thanks so much for your time today.
No problem, Tomas.
Lorna Porca with Tomas McCarthy on WLR.